One sultan built a city he believed would be the greatest capital on earth, and then ordered the entire population to abandon it and march 700 miles, on foot, through brutal heat, to a new capital he had chosen instead. Thousands died on that march. The new capital failed. He marched everyone back. His own court historian, a man writing in real time, watching it happen, called him both a genius and possibly insane. This is not a footnote in Indian history. This is one chapter in one of the strangest, most violent, most fascinating empires to ever rule the Indian subcontinent. For 320 years, from 1206 to 1526, a series of 5 dynasties ruled from Delhi. Slave soldiers who became kings. A ruler who fixed the price of every single item in his empire by hand. A sultan who repelled the Mongols when no one else in the world could. And a final battle so devastating it ended the entire era in a single afternoon. This is the Delhi Sultanate. Explained from the beginning. To understand the Delhi Sultanate, you need to go back to 1192. A Central Asian conqueror named Muhammad of Ghor defeated the last major Hindu Rajput resistance in northern India at the Second Battle of Tamerlane. Ghor did not stay in India to rule it directly. Instead, he left behind one of his most trusted generals to govern and expand the new territory. That general's name was Qutb Aibak. Here is the detail that makes this story remarkable. Aibak was not born a noble. He was not born a prince. He had been purchased as a slave as a child, trained in a system the Muslim world used extensively, military slavery, where talented boys were raised, educated, and trained specifically to become elite soldiers and administrators. This system regularly produced some of the most capable rulers and generals in Islamic history, precisely because advancement was based on skill rather than birth. When Muhammad of Ghor was assassinated in 1206, Aibak, the former slave, now the most powerful military commander in northern India, declared himself independent ruler. He established his capital in Delhi. The Delhi Sultanate had begun, and its first ruling dynasty would become known, fittingly, as the Mamluk dynasty, the slave dynasty. Aibak ruled for only 4 years before dying in a polo accident in 1210. But what he started would not stop for over 3 centuries. The early slave dynasty was unstable. Multiple rulers came and went in quick succession through the 1200s. Then, in 1266, one of the most ruthlessly effective rulers in the entire history of the Sultanate took the throne. His name was Ghiyas-ud-Din Balban. And like the founder before him, he had also started life as a slave, captured as a boy in Central Asia, sold into the Delhi Sultanate's administrative system, and risen entirely on merit and ruthless political skill to become sultan himself. Balban inherited a kingdom on the edge of collapse. The Mongol Empire, the most terrifying military force on earth at the time, the same Mongols who had just burned Baghdad to the ground in 1258, were pressing against the northwestern borders of his territory constantly. Balban's solution was absolute, uncompromising authority. He believed the only way to hold the Sultanate together against external threats and internal rebellion was through fear and total control. He crushed rebellious nobles without mercy. He built a powerful, loyal standing army. He fortified the northwestern frontier specifically to hold back Mongol incursions. And it worked. Throughout his reign, the Mongols who had destroyed empires across Asia and the Middle East could not break through into Delhi territory. Balban ruled for over 20 years through sheer iron discipline. When he died in 1287, the dynasty he left behind quickly weakened without his singular force of holding it together. Within a decade, a new and far more ambitious dynasty would seize power entirely. If there is one ruler from the Delhi Sultanate whose name still provokes strong reactions in India today, it is this one. Alauddin Khalji seized the throne in 1296 under brutal circumstances. He assassinated his own uncle, the previous sultan, to take power. From the very beginning of his reign, brutality was the method, not the exception. But Khalji was not simply violent. He was one of the most strategically capable rulers the Sultanate ever produced. The Mongol threat that Balban had managed decades earlier returned during Khalji's reign, and far more aggressively. Multiple massive Mongol invasions struck northern India during his rule. Khalji defeated every single one of them. At a time when Mongol armies were still considered nearly unstoppable across most of Asia, Khalji's forces repelled them repeatedly, protecting Delhi from a fate that had already befallen Baghdad and countless other great cities. He also dramatically expanded the Sultanate's territory southward, sending his general Malik Kafur deep into the Deccan Plateau and even further south, bringing unprecedented Sultanate influence into regions of India that had never been under Delhi's control before. But what historians find most fascinating about Khilji is something almost no other ruler in history attempted at this scale. He tried to control the entire economy by force. Khilji implemented a strict system of price controls across his entire empire. He fixed the prices of grain, cloth, horses, slaves, and virtually every other major commodity, enforced through a massive network of market inspectors and brutal punishments for violations. His stated goal was to keep his enormous standing army affordable to maintain and to prevent merchants from exploiting wartime shortages. Remarkably, by most historical accounts, the system actually worked for a significant period. Prices in Delhi's markets reportedly remained stable and low throughout much of his reign, an extraordinary achievement for pre-modern economic policy enforced through sheer authoritarian will. Khilji died in 1316. Within a few years, his dynasty collapsed into succession chaos, and a new dynasty took power. This is the ruler from the opening of this video, and his story remains one of the most genuinely bizarre in Indian history. Muhammad bin Tughlaq became sultan in 1325, inheriting an empire that, on paper, was the largest the Sultanate had ever controlled, stretching across most of the Indian subcontinent. He was, by multiple historical accounts, extraordinarily intelligent. He was fluent in multiple languages, deeply read in philosophy, mathematics, and astronomy, and personally corresponded with scholars across the Islamic world. He was also responsible for some of the most disastrous policy decisions in the Sultanate's entire history. In 1327, Tughlaq decided to move his capital from Delhi to Daulatabad, a fortress city nearly 700 miles south in the Deccan, in modern-day Maharashtra. His reasoning, according to court historians, was strategically sound on paper. Daulatabad was more centrally located within his vast empire and harder for enemies to besiege. But the execution was catastrophic. He ordered the entire population of Delhi, reportedly including common citizens, not just the court and administration, to relocate to the new capital. Thousands died during the brutal march south through extreme heat. The 14th-century historian Ziauddin Bahrani, who lived through this period, wrote that Delhi became so depopulated that not even a cat or a dog was left in the city. Within just a few years, recognizing the failure, Tughlaq reversed the decision entirely and ordered everyone back to Delhi. His second infamous policy came shortly after. Facing financial pressure from constant military campaigns, Tughlaq introduced token currency. Copper and brass coins he declared had the same value as gold and silver coins, similar in concept to modern paper currency backed by a government's authority rather than the actual material value. The idea itself was centuries ahead of its time economically. The problem was enforcement. Counterfeiting exploded immediately, since common people could easily mint their own copper coins. The currency system collapsed within a few years, and Tughlaq was eventually forced to redeem the worthless token coins for real gold and silver from the royal treasury, severely damaging the empire's finances. Tughlaq ruled for 26 chaotic years, facing constant rebellions across his vast territory, many regions breaking away permanently during his reign. When he died in 1351, the Sultanate he left behind had begun an irreversible decline from its peak territorial size. Tughlaq's successor, FIROZ Shah Tughlaq, took a dramatically different approach. Rather than continuing aggressive military expansion, he focused on infrastructure, irrigation canals, and public works, ruling for 37 relatively stable years. But the territorial losses from his predecessor's chaotic reign were never fully reversed. Then, in 1398, an event occurred that devastated Delhi more severely than almost anything in its history to this point. Timur, the same terrifying Central Asian conqueror who would later defeat the Ottoman Sultan Bayezid at Ankara just 4 years later, invaded northern India, sacked Delhi with extraordinary brutality, and withdrew with immense plunder, leaving the city devastated and the Tughlaq dynasty's authority shattered beyond repair. A weakened, much smaller dynasty called the SAYYID dynasty took nominal control of Delhi starting in 1414, But by this point the Sultanate barely extended beyond the city itself and its immediate surroundings. Most of the territory once controlled by Khilji and the early Tughlaqs had splintered into independent regional kingdoms. The Sultanate that once stretched across most of the subcontinent had shrunk to a fraction of its former size. In 1451, an Afghan noble named Bala Lodi overthrew the weakened SAYYID dynasty and established what would become the final ruling dynasty of the Delhi Sultanate. The Lodi dynasty, notably the first and only Afghan dynasty to rule from Delhi during this entire period. The Lodis managed to partially rebuild Delhi's territorial strength, particularly under Balal's successor Sikandar Lodi, who expanded eastward into Bihar and strengthened administration significantly. But the final Lodi ruler, Ibrahim Lodi, who took the throne in 1517, proved far less capable than his predecessors. He was widely regarded by contemporary accounts as arrogant and harsh toward his own nobility, alienating powerful regional governors and military commanders who had previously remained loyal to the dynasty. Several of these alienated nobles, seeking a way to remove Lodi from power, began secretly reaching out to a Central Asian warlord living in exile in Kabul, a descendant of Timur and Genghis Khan, who had spent years rebuilding his strength after losing his own homeland multiple times. His name was Babur. In April 1526, Babur crossed into India with a relatively small army equipped with gunpowder weapons and innovative battlefield tactics. At the Battle of Panipat, his forces decisively defeated Ibrahim Lodi's vastly larger army. Lodi died on the battlefield. The Delhi Sultanate, 320 years, 5 dynasties, and an extraordinary, often violent history, ended in a single afternoon. In its place, Babur founded a new empire. The Mughal Empire had begun. Across 320 years and 5 dynasties, the Delhi Sultanate fundamentally reshaped the Indian subcontinent in ways that lasted for centuries afterward. It introduced new architectural styles. The Qutb Minar, begun under Aibak and completed by his successors, still stands in Delhi today as one of the tallest brick minarets in the world. It established administrative and revenue systems that later empires, including the Mughals, would build upon directly. It permanently altered the religious and cultural landscape of northern India, with lasting influence still visible today in language, cuisine, architecture, and tradition across the region. It survived Mongol invasions that destroyed other great civilizations. It produced rulers who were simultaneously brilliant and brutal, visionary and disastrous, sometimes within the same individual, sometimes within the same decade of a single reign. The Delhi Sultanate was not one empire. It was 5 different dynasties, dozens of rulers, and 320 years of constant transformation, setting the stage directly for what would come next. The Mughal Empire did not appear from nothing. It rose from the ruins, the lessons, and the groundwork the Delhi Sultanate left behind. A former slave who became a king. A ruler who held back the Mongols when empires across Asia were falling. A sultan who tried to control an entire economy by force. And, for a time, actually succeeded. A genius whose own decisions nearly destroyed his empire. And a final battle that ended an entire era in a single afternoon. 320 years. 5 dynasties. One foundation that an even greater empire would soon be built upon. This was the Delhi Sultanate. If you watched our Rise of the Mughal Empire video, you now have the missing piece. What came directly before it, and exactly how it set the stage for Babur's invasion in 1526. Subscribe because we are going deeper into South Asian and Islamic history every single week. Drop a comment. Which ruler shocked you the most? Khilji's price controls or Tughlaq's disastrous capital move? See you in the next one.